In this video, we'll take a look at the requirement for our BMI project. Recall that the requirement phase involves understanding the platform on which the sought system will run, as well as its user interface, the UI, which means what exactly will the user enter and what will the system produce. Now, for the platform, the client specifies any preferred environment in which the system will be run. For example, a desktop running under Windows, Linux, macOS, etc., or perhaps a browser, which implies a web application. The client may also specify mobile environment, a tablet, a phone, a wearable, or perhaps an embedded kind of system running, let's say, in a Raspberry Pi, in a microcontroller, etc. That's the platform. As for the user interface, it's really understanding the input and the output. For the input, three things are involved. We need to know how the user will interact with the software. Perhaps the user will type in a few entries, perhaps select from a drop-down list, push a button, a combination of these, and so on. The second point is understanding the type of information that the user will supply. Is it numeric? Is it strings? Is it dates? And so on. And number three, the validation rules. This last piece is perhaps the most important because most software errors, viruses, malware, and so on creep in when developers fail to validate their entries. Unfortunately, they often do, fail to validate the user entries. For example, if one of the inputs is the user's year of birth, then the system expects the user to enter a number, a year, not a string. That's an example of validation. Moreover, the number has to be an integer, not a real number. So the year of birth cannot be 2000.3. It should also be positive, and its range must be reasonable. All these are validation conditions, and the requirement document must spell out exactly how the system is to respond to a wrong entry. Should it display an error message and abort? Perhaps display an error message and allow the user to retry a few times, crash completely, which is not good, and so on. Now, moving to output, three things are involved as well. There is the mechanism by which the output is produced. How will the system render the results? Perhaps display it, perhaps display it as an answer, display it as a map with a certain location highlighted, perhaps change the color of a UI widget, and so on. In terms of information type, this refers to the preference of the user as to how the information is presented. For example, let's say you're computing a distance. Should it be shown in miles or meters or kilometers? Finally, the formatting of the information involved things like the number of decimals, whether it should be rounded, should there be a thousand separator, what's the layout of the output, alignment, and so on. Now, for the BMI project in particular, we're going to assume that the client wanted the platform to be mobile. Furthermore, it insisted that it has to be an Android environment with a minimum API level of ice cream sandwich, or I. If you don't know this, the Android platform has API levels or versions, if you like, that go alphabetically from A to B to C, and it's always an interesting, colorful name. I is ice cream sandwich, J is jelly beans, K is Kit Kat, L is lollipop, and a year ago marshmallow came, and now we have nougat for n. In terms of entries, we expect the user to enter the weight in kilograms because the BMI project involves weights and heights. So we need the weight in kilograms, the height in meters. Both are expected to be real numbers. So here's the mechanism and here's the information type. In terms of layout, we expect them to be in text boxes, that is, boxes in which the user can make the entry. And let's say the user wants these boxes to be arranged vertically, the weight on top and under it the height box. There should be some prompts so the user knows which box corresponds to what entry. And then there should be a button underneath the height. When the user pushes the button, the answer should appear. In terms of validation, we will be true to the spirit of the iterative model that we talked about in the previous video and not do everything at once. Therefore, we'll leave the validation to the next release. Let's just ignore everything now and focus on computing the index given the input. We will not worry at this stage if the weight, for example, were not a number, if the weight is not meaningful as a weight, negative, for example, and we will ignore other features that the user alluded to. For example, the user was, when we met with the user mentioned things like the height could be in feet and inches, the weight could be in pounds, and so on. We will address all these tweaks in future releases. Now, once the compute button is pushed, the output should appear. That is, the system must compute the BMI index and display it in an output box under the button. Again, we will delay any question relating to color, alignment, font, whether it should be bold, italic, etc., to future releases. The only requirement we ask for is that the number, the index, should be rounded to the nearest decimal. So, for example, if the answer is 23.47, then the user would like to see it as 23.5 instead. So that captures all the elements of the requirement for our project. Then here's a screenshot that captures the key requirement. This would be a phone or a tablet. Here are the prompts. It says your weight, your height, and this line underlines the entries that to be made. So presumably the user makes an entry here, pushes the compute button, and the answer will appear somewhere under it.